Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I think it's always challenging doing a session after lunch because everybody, especially if they've had a good lunch, would have this inclination to nap off. And I think talking about security is probably not the easiest thing to keep you awake as well. So I'll forgive you if you're not off. Don't worry about it. Yeah. Fall over. Yeah, I think, and this quote, particularly when I was on site with a customer a few weeks ago, was sort of made its point in that we were trying to do something and the system administrator was getting stuck because of security. And this is something that he sort of said in his own words, that it is somewhat excessive. But you only find it's excessive when it's stopping you from doing something. But at least if it's stopping you from doing something, it's also stopping hackers from getting into your system. So it's a necessary evil, yeah? So for the agenda, I'm going to, as an introduction, we'll talk about some cybersecurity trends. We'll look at how HP non-stop focuses on security. We'll look at the portfolio, although I will breeze through the portfolio as quickly as I can, again in the interest of time. We'll list all the security partners, and some of them are here. And then I'll take you through the bundled security and ways that you can use security that's bundled on your system to integrate your non-stop into your corporate security environment. And we heard Steve talk this morning and asked about who likes to save money. So I'll follow that up with another question. So who likes to get things for free? Yeah, and pretty much everybody does. So yeah, this is free. This is something already on your systems. You just have to make use of it. Yeah? And then I'll point you to some reference material, and one that particularly for me I find not enough customers appear to be aware of. Steve mentioned it this morning as well, and it's the Non-Stop Security Hardening Guide. It's a fantastic guide that's been set up by HP Product Management along with our security partners, and it looks at pretty much everything that you should focus on if you are serious about security on your non-stop system. It gets updated every year as well, so it's kept up to date with security trends and also what our partners are doing to enhance your security. So I'll mention that again later, but that I think is a really good reference point for any customer who's serious about securing their non-stop systems. Right. So when I started putting this deck together, I looked through some of the cybersecurity trends that Gartner were talking about, and they reference in this quite a bit this thing of a mesh architecture. And just some points that I referenced in there and sort of highlighted is, reducing financial impact. By 2024, all organizations will have adopted a mesh architecture. So again, there's lots of references to mesh architecture, and I was like, well, what exactly is a mesh architecture? And so again, I found a description for it, and it says, a composable and scalable approach to extending security controls even to widely distributed assets. And I think non-stop typically fits into that location, that widely distributed. It's always been kept as a silo. It's always been treated differently. And I think more and more with security trends and regulations, there is a requirement for non-stop customers to get the security of that system maintained within the enterprise rather than maintained on its own. Again, so PCI 4.0 was released in March of this year, and pretty much anyone who's adhering to the 3.2.1 standards will have a further 2 years to maintain that, and then they'll be forced to move to the 4.0 standards as well. So I thought it was probably worthwhile that we look at some of the things that's new in PCI 4.0 now. Probably can't see this all that well, but the first is to continue to meet security needs of the payments industry. And the first thing they've highlighted there is expanding multi-factor authentication. Customers, how many of you are using multi-factor authentication on your non-stop service today? Small handful, yeah. So yeah, that's something that's been highlighted. The next is promoting security as a continuous process. Yeah, criminals never sleep. Yeah. As Steve said this morning, they'd been active on a system for 4 years before anybody became aware of it. So they will stay there dormant, you know, learning as much as they possibly can about your system without you ever being aware of it. Increase flexibility for organizations using different methods to achieve security objectives. And the final one is enhancing validation methods and procedures. So these are just 4 highlights that I've picked out of the PCI 4.0. Yeah, I find this more and more with customers I work with, this mantra of, you know, what got you here won't get you there. I think a lot of people, particularly in the non-stop world, have always thought or used this concept of security by obscurity as being sufficient protection for their systems. Yeah? If nobody knows about non-stop because they don't learn about it at university, then we're safe. Yeah? And I see so many customers who will, when they go through a technology refresh, will they'll export the security settings of system A and they'll import them to system B. Never mind the fact that what we did 15, 20 years ago, you know, while it was good enough for us 15, 20 years ago, is not good for us anymore. So I think it's a particularly bad practice of exporting and importing because we take bad habits with us. You know? And I prefer to get customers to rather look at reviewing security standards and trying to roll out a new security environment when they set up a new system as well. Okay? Yeah, IT environment's always changing. Things are becoming more and more complex, and as we need to tighten up on security, that has evolved as well. Obviously, non-stop needs to keep up with the times, protecting systems, but being as least disruptive as we possibly can. So that's proper English, but disrupt customers' applications as little as we possibly can. And of course, yeah, we hear about all these regulatory requirements. They get updated all the time, and they're being enforced on customers. And while non-stop customers historically have been protected from this because we've always operated in isolation, that is no longer the case. And there are more and more customers who are needing to adhere to security regulations and to prove that their systems are maintaining those standards as well. Yeah, so HPE's strategy and focus is to make sure that we provide capabilities to protect and secure not only our systems, but our application workloads and our databases, and being able to monitor all those logs and to be able to generate alerts on those as well. And of course, as I say, integrating your non-stop into the enterprise as well. So there's lots of focus on all of these when decisions are made from HP product management in terms of your non-stop security. I'm going to breeze through this quite a bit, and a lot of this is changing quite often. So if we look at our security portfolio, we can kind of batch different products into these 5 pillars. Protecting non-stop, protecting applications, protecting data, protecting communication, and of course monitoring and auditing. So these, again, sort of adheres to the strategy that HPE non-stop has in terms of the security of their systems. And there are lots of products on here. Not all of them are security-related products. Some of them are application products, but they have security inherent in their design as well. So they are listed here. And of course, with the HPE non-stop product showcase, a lot of these are there are updates to this being made continuously as HPE and our security partners add more and more products to our suite as well. So these are getting updated all the time. Some of these are included free. The ones in white typically are embedded with your system or in the OS. And some of these are obviously add-on price book products. Yeah, security partners. Nonstop has always had a fantastic partner ecosystem. And we've got some really good partners out there who have products that, in this case, look at security on your systems. So, you know, there are lots of, and some of these partners are here, and I obviously encourage you to speak to them and hear what it is they have to offer. And we're starting to bring in some of the partner products into the price book as well, because we see the value in those products to our customers. Okay, so again, those are just some of the security partners, and as I said, they are, some of them are here, so I encourage you to speak to them, hear what it is they have to offer to help you enhance the security of your systems. Right, now we look at the main purpose of this talk, which is to look at how we integrate Nonstop into your enterprise. And as I say, this is free. Yeah? Everybody loves a free lunch. Yeah? So this is free. It comes bundled with your operating system. You all have access to this. And if you're not using it, speak to me afterwards. We'll look at how we can help you to get this rolled out in your environment as well. Okay. The first one is merged audit. Now, the biggest challenge for any customer, any Nonstop customer, is the fact that there are many disparate security type subsystems in your environment, and they all have different audit requirements. They all store the audit records in a different format. So if you need to maintain this, it's difficult to go from, you know, how do you maintain one subsystem versus the other? And what merged audit does is, there's across the board with these different subsystems, there's some commonality. So what they do is they take the areas that are common amongst those different subsystems, and they combine them into, you know, through what they refer to as normalizing. They combine them into a database. So from these different subsystems, they write information off into a separate database, and from there, you can either generate alerts or you can send it off to a SIM. And we look at how merged audit works. Okay, so through some animations, hopefully this becomes a bit clearer. So merged audit is a pathway application. Okay? And I've spoken about the different subsystems or different security type subsystems, and they're all storing their audit records in different locations. So Safeguard has its audit trails. EMS in $0 has some security type information as well. There are Zygate modules which also have their own audits, and some applications or plugins also have different audits. Yeah? So many different audit sources, different types of information or similar information being captured in all of them. But there's, you know, rather than looking at them individually, merged audit uses its processing to actually combine that. So we have things called movers, which are actually pathway server classes. These movers read the audit records from the different subsystems, and then through these filter processing and constantly reading these server classes, it can now write off into a SIM. Whether that's Splunk, QRadar, RSA, doesn't matter. We can write off directly into there, which is one of the PCI requirements, is that your audit logs need to be kept off box. So that's one way of achieving that. We can also generate alerts which would send out via either a critical EMS message or sending things to email. So you can write separate filters to generate, if somebody fails a logon as super, you want to generate, not just send it into Splunk, you want to get an email about that. So you would write a filter to do that for you. All of this is in the SQL database, and there are tools like the report manager and the event monitor, which you can then use to generate audit reports based on the information that is being captured there. Okay, so that's the first one. How many of us are using merged audit today? Yeah, most of us, great. And we're sending it off to a SIM, yeah, and generating alerts as well. Yeah, good. Excellent. You'd be amazed how many customers I've been to when you talk about this and they have this blank stare in their faces, like they've never heard of it, they've got no idea what it is. I visited a customer one day and he was very happy to show me that, oh, we're about to buy some software. Do you think this is good for me? You know, will this be of benefit? And when I looked at it, it's like, it was to send information off to Splunk, was one of them, and the other was to for multi-factor authentication. I said, you're spending a huge amount of money on something you already have, and he was completely unaware of it. Right? The second one is user authentication. Of course, the challenge here is enterprises are enforcing multi-factor authentication or single sign-on. Safeguard on its own can't do this, but through the use of a safeguard event exit process, XUA is able to intercept logon requests and send that off to an Active Directory service and provide authentication outside of non-stop. If it was single sign-on, or if it was multi-factor authentication, your safeguard authentication would be first, and then we have Active Directory as your second factor. Okay, and how does this work? So we have safeguard, we have a user sitting at a session, and they log on. Supposed to be a typewriter there. So, yeah, logs on as super.hpe. That request goes into safeguard where the authentication SEEP would recognize that and send that off to the XUA process. In the XUA process, through its configuration file, we'll see. Here we go. So super.admin, it's got a concept of a group where you can group certain users together. Again, because of screen real estate, I've only got one user in that group, but that could be multiple users, and they don't necessarily have to be in the super group. So you could enforce the same rules for different groups of users on your system. So in this case, again, I say for screen real estate, James Bond is there, super.jamesbond. And we'll see in the authentication rule, which is the second group, UA group LDAP auth is the authentication rule. And this authentication rule says whenever anyone logs on to anybody in the super.admin group, or super-admin group, which is up there, it needs to authenticate via LDAP. It's to authenticate via LDAP, and it's going to map that user with its Active Directory user ID. Okay? So what happens is that Active Directory user ID then gets sent across to whatever Active Directory service we're using. That's going to communicate back with user authentication and is going to prompt the user for his password. Okay? Again, let's say if we were looking at two-factor authentication, the first authentication would be a safeguard one, and once that authentication is successful, at that point it's going to go down and do the same process here. So the user then has to enter their password, and again you can just hear the clicking. So you need to know the LDAP user. Yeah? So No, so it's taking the super.hp user and it's replacing it with the Active Directory user. So you would typically know what your Active Directory, you need to know that. Yeah.
And is that on the non-stop?
No, that's your enterprise Active Directory. Okay, so if you're using LDAP, RSA, Radius, whatever it is, your Active Directory administrator would give you that user ID. But typically you would know what your user ID is, yeah? So you would then map that for every user that needs to authenticate an Active Directory. Again, I say for screen real estate, there's just one user there. But if I had 15 users in the super-admin group and they all needed to authenticate with Active Directory, I'd have a mapping for each of those user IDs or aliases. I'd have a mapping for those to the Active Directory user ID. And that's the bit that's going to get sent across. Yeah? And then if Active Directory recognizes that as an active user, it's going to say, yeah, the user ID is correct. Now can you provide me with a password? And then you don't need your safeguard password. You now need your Active Directory password. Okay? So that's if you're using single sign-on. If you're using multi-factor authentication, as I say, your first password request is going to be your safeguard password. If you fail that, it's not going to go further. It will stop you right there. If you are successful in your safeguard password, It's going to then pass you through XUA to get your Active Directory credentials, which could be a token, it could be another password, something that you yourself would know rather than your administrator would know.
So if I'm logged on to my computer using my Active Directory account
Yeah.
already, and then I go and log onto the Tandem,
Yeah.
will it use my single sign-on I've already done? Or will I have to sign on to a Tandem
No,
account?
you have to sign on again.
So it's not single sign-on.
It's not truly single sign-on, but it is using the same credentials as you have available on your Active Directory already. Is that right, Steve?
Yeah, it's federating the ID, so you'd have to log on again, but it's the exact same credential.
Yeah.
So it's more of a directory authentication than a single
Yeah.
sign-on.
Yeah, so not true single sign-on as you said, but it does allow you to have those Active Directory credentials to provide your access rather than just being forced through Safeguard. Okay. Yeah, so reference material. Again, there are lots of reference documents. If you go into your HPE support center, you access the knowledge base. Any of these documents you'd be able to find available there. They're all a massive source of reference, and I think any customer who has not, and I've highlighted there, who has not looked at the non-stop security hardening guide is not serious about non-stop security. Okay, as I say, it was written about 10 years ago. I think the current version is should be on the next slide. Yeah, so you get to it through your HPE support center. Any of those documents you would get through the same location. Yeah. So if you do a search for any of them, you'd be able to find any of those documents there. I strongly recommend you get the latest version of the non-stop security hardening guide. As I say, it takes you through the implementation approach that HPE recommends, which is control, so controlling access, auditing, monitoring your systems, protecting data in motion, protecting data at rest. It follows through all of those pillars throughout the document. It lists things that you should be looking at in terms of your safeguard globals, what you should be setting your safeguard globals at, what the recommended values are. It explains some of those safeguard globals, so you don't have to read through the 400 and some odd page safeguard reference manual to do so. You read through this document, it's going to take you through a summarized version to make sure you are able to harden your non-stop server in the best way possible. I cannot stress enough how important it is for customers to actually download this document and make sure you have it and review it on a regular basis. It gets updated once a year. So we're currently on version 1.9, which was released in December last year. Free. I said, everybody likes something for free, yeah? Again, Steve spoke about this morning, the rapid security assessment. Again, if you as a customer, and I get it, as customers we are busy, we have lots to do on a day-to-day basis. We might not have the time available to work through the entire security hardening guide and to go through all of that. So the security assessment is, I won't say a quick, easy fix, but it's a quick view of what your security looks like on your system. As Steve said this morning, there are over 120 security vectors across 6 key categories. You might not be able to see them, but system components, system files, operating system, utilities, user accounts, and password. So this was an assessment that I had done on our lab system. So yeah, you wouldn't expect it to be particularly hardened. And you can see that in the report. Yeah? So we're at about 50%. These are slides from the report you would get once you submit this request through Zypro. It's a very easy tool. There's nothing you need to install. You have an object file. You run the object file. Within minutes, you get some output that looks similar to this. You get some output. Do a screen grab of that entire output. Send it off to Zypro. And within a few days, you get a report back that's going to tell you what your risk profile is for each of those 6 categories. Okay? Again, this is free. Yeah? if you want a good view of what the security of your system is, I encourage you to get access to this tool, run it on your system, and get the report generated. Okay? It might be, and we've got reference of this, where customers think their systems are really well secured. We run the report and find massive loopholes that they were not aware of themselves. And through the running of this tool and the report being generated, they've had a completely different view on what the security of their systems should be looking like. Okay? So again, I encourage you, please, run this tool and speak to myself, you can speak to Steve, anyone at Zypro, Graham. We'll get the tool out to you, run it, we'll get the report generated, and we'll work with you in terms of, you know, how we need to address any of those potential shortfalls you have. The product security vulnerability alerts is it's an HPE portal, and Nonstop has since been added to that. So any security vulnerabilities that you potentially hear about in the press, that should be your first reference to see if Nonstop is impacted by that. Now, I expect that this site has changed a few times over the past few years, so it might not be exactly the same screenshot you're going to get when you access the SharePoint or the portal, but typically there's going to be a link somewhere to product security bulletins, and when you click on that link, there'll be a drop-down list, and you would select Nonstop in there, and you'd have a listing of all the Nonstop vulnerabilities. And I believe that's me done. Thank you. Any questions? No?
Security assessment free?
Is it free? Wait, did you say free? Yes, it is free. The question.
With that assessment, it says nothing to install, just run it.
Yeah.
So, is it on the system already?
No.
So you have to install something.
Well, you don't install it. There's an object file you just copy to your system, and you run the object file.
You know, you mentioned multi-factor authentication and two-factor authentication.
Yeah.
Are they two separate things? Is two-factor authentication multi-factor authentication, or is it not enough factors?
I would say it's the same thing. I think
When I work, they add two-factor authentication but keep the password. So that's multi-factor. That means I still have a password and I have a PIN and I have something that I have on my phone.
Yeah.
And to satisfy the audit requirement, is the token and the PIN enough to be satisfy PCI, for example, where it says MFA?
Well, I'll refer to Steve here. I think, Steve, you're probably more aware of what the requirements are than I am.
Yeah, it's something you have, something you know, something you are. Two out of three. It used to be two-factor authentication, but now over time, over the next few years, we're going to see two-factor authentication kind of going by the wayside and adding a third factor. So they played with the language a little bit to give that flexibility to turn two-factor into multi-factor. That's all it is.
You see?
Multi is more than one.
Yeah. Yeah.
15 of us will Google that just
Strictly speaking, yes, it is.
The important thing is that it should be done by two separate parts.
Correct.
That's the important thing.
Yeah, two passwords back to back is not multi-factor authentication. Isn't considered multi-factor.
So this, as I said, in the example that played out in the animation, we were looking at just a single factor. I should probably update that and have safeguard as the first factor authentication, and then Active Directory as the second, which could be another password, it could be a token, PIN. But again, everything I've spoken about here, you already have on your system. Yeah. And if you're not using it, then you're not integrating your Nonstop into your enterprise environment in any way. And I think it's incredibly important that customers start looking at this. So if you're not doing it already, you should be doing it. And if you need help, that's exactly what we're here for. More than happy to help you set this up as well.